Changing the spark plugs on a 2018 Honda Accord starts by opening the driver's door and pulling the hood release towards you. The exterior hood release lever is located midline in front of the Honda emblem. Push the hood release lever to the left and lift the hood. Free the hood prop from its receiver and swing it into the passenger side receiver in the hood. Locate the 4 ignition coils on the engine. Depress the clip on the 4 plastic connectors and pull on the plastic to remove the connector from the ignition coil. Do not pull on the wire. Free the torque on the 4 10mm bolts on the ignition coils. Turn the 10mm bolts counterclockwise until each is fully loosened. Remove and stow the 4 10mm bolts. Now would be a good time to use an air compressor to blow away any debris that could later fall into the ignition chamber. Pull straight up on each one of the 4 ignition coils to remove. With the 4 ignition coils removed, we can see the top of each of the spark plugs. Using a 14mm magnetic swivel spark plug socket with 12-inch extension, free the torque on each one of the 4 spark plugs, turning the socket wrench counterclockwise. Fully loosen and remove each one of the 4 spark plugs using the magnetic socket. Here is a look at the OEM NGK spark plugs that we will be installing. I've shown the model number of the spark plug for your convenience. We'll remove the new spark plug and compare it to the old spark plug with approximately 60,000 miles on it, which is the interval that I plan to follow replacing these new plugs when I reach 120,000 miles. We'll place dielectric grease on a finger and rub it on the ceramic portion of each spark plug to keep moisture and dirt away from the terminal when seated in the boot. Avoid getting grease on the metal spark plug terminals, the threads, or the coil in the boots. There is much debate on the internet on whether or not to place anti-seize on the threads of the spark plugs. Doing so could reduce the torque rating by 20%. I install my spark plugs with no anti-seize on the threads as the old ones had none. Place the new spark plug into the magnetic socket and very slowly and carefully lower it into the ignition chamber. Do not drop the spark plug into the ignition chamber. Doing so could augment the gap of the plug and cause misfires. Slowly hand tighten the spark plug until tight. Be extremely careful not to cross thread the plug into the ignition block. Do not use power tools for this task. Torque the spark plugs to 16 foot-pounds. A critical step recommended by the manufacturer but often overlooked is to replace the coil on plug boot attached to the ignition coil. With a twisting motion, pull these off the ignition coil. This set of 4 boots comes with a taped on coil. Completely remove the tape securing each coil to the boots. Apply a light coat of dielectric grease to the face of the boot that marries to the ignition coil and a light coat to the base that marries to the ceramic part of the spark plug. Drop in and fully seat the coil into the boot from the wide-mouthed end that marries to the ignition coil. Apply a light coat of dielectric grease to each one of the ignition coils as shown. This will make it easier to install the boot. Twist and push the boot around the lower stem of the ignition coil as shown here and make sure the boot is fully seated. Slowly reinstall each ignition coil. Push on each one with the palm of your hand to make sure it is fully seated against the engine and the spark plug below. Reinstall the 10mm ignition coil bolts and finger tighten each until secure to avoid cross-threading. There's no torque spec that I could find for the 10mm bolts on the ignition coils. Tighten these by hand carefully. Avoid over-tightening to prevent a snapped bolt. Plug in each ignition wire, pushing on the plastic connector and confirming a click to know that it is fully seated and secured. Return the hood prop into the lower receiver and close the hood. Back in the vehicle, fire up the engine and confirm that everything looks and sounds as expected. Take your car for a spin and feel for performance improvements or decreases. That's it. Thanks for watching. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up, and please consider supporting my channel with a YouTube thanks in the links below.